Welcome back, bunnies, to another episode of Burrowed Thoughts. I'm your host, Lana, and I sit here and I talk about people's fears or things people are scared of. I don't know, whatever you think I do is what I do, basically. And I have my friends come on the show and
Hello,
they talk
Rima.
about their stuff.
My
This is
name is
Rima.
Rima. I love Lena here. She's my
Thank
best
you.
friend, and it's an honor to be here.
Thank you. Thank you for coming and being on the show. And today we're coming at a very interesting topic because it's very close to both of us because we both, I would like, I don't know if I would describe us as both childish, but I think we're
Yeah, I
childish
mean, we
at
can say,
heart.
yeah.
So today we're talking about growing old.
We kind of like started this topic before that we started the video. Like we were
Mhm.
talking about. Well, I chose the topic because like I don't know. I always just think of like whenever I see in Segovia like little grandpas and grandmas like walking around, and if like they have difficulties, and I'm like, oh, like that's sad. Like, yeah. No, and like I
Yeah.
feel like also like because we're very like childish at heart, and it's like when we're going to grow old, and it's like we're not going to be able to do everything that
That we can
we
do
can
now.
do now. And even it's like for me, like part of like the personality is like, okay, I know like growing old and like getting wrinkles and stuff, and like I know people don't think it's that deep, but I feel like now, because like okay, like for example, we're short, okay,
Yeah.
like we're very
It's true.
short, and it's um like we act super girly, and like having that like young, like
Mhm.
looking young is just like it like makes you feel like you're in that like
Totally.
and like growing older you make I feel like I'm gonna be those type like looking in the mirror like in the movies like, oh my god, I'm getting like a
I'm
wrinkle.
old.
But, yeah.
I understand that because I feel like you know how we call like there's stores that are just old lady stores. Like
Uh-huh.
that says a lot already
Yeah.
because you're expected to change as you get older. And there are things like the whole child like at our heart for us is the
Mm-hmm.
fact that like I don't want that to change. I still want to be like a grandma wearing
Yes.
her like Hello
Hello
Kitty
Kitty sweater, and like yeah.
yeah, if my grandkids
Yeah.
come and this is like casually what I'm wearing,
Yeah.
that would be fantastic. But the thing is there's like a set expectation for you because you're gonna change
Mm-hmm.
physically, and like you said, you see that there's like already like old people all the time on the old people, elderly. Let's be nice.
Uh-huh.
Elderly who are having difficulties, or
Mm-hmm.
you know, there's a million movies about elderly having a hard time.
Yeah.
And then it's like, well, how much do I have to sacrifice by the time I get there?
Yeah.
Which I think is what makes it super scary.
Yeah. Also, I don't know, even like when you go and like you want to help someone who's old, and it's like I don't know if they like it or not, because I feel like if when I'm old and like I see someone young helping me, I'm like, no, don't help me. Like
I've got this.
I
I've got
got this.
this.
um,
I think there's like a genuine fear for it in the sense of like so many different factors in the physicality and the mentality and what you remember and what you don't.
yeah.
And for that reason, people start thinking about it like really, really young.
Mm-hmm.
And even there's so many people who are like, as soon as you start turning like, for example, like 21, you're like
You're like,
closer to
I'm old.
40. I know. And we always say like we're old, we're old.
Yeah.
And there just gets to a point where you're like, when do I stop saying I'm old and I'm
Yeah.
actually old?
Yeah.
Because 21 is not old. Like being like
Yeah.
19 is not old, but
Yeah. I feel like we say that because like we're scared that time, like one of the things I think about a lot like being in uni, it's like I need to make free time to have like those experiences I can have when I'm young, because like when I'm older I'm not gonna be able to. So it's like I need to like make time for it, and I'm always scared that like, oh my god, like I'm not doing enough, and like um but yeah. And also
Mhm,
it's like the reason like that I take pictures a lot and like I film
mhm.
everything. It's like that's one of the reasons like when
Yeah,
you're older you're gonna forget, and it's
yeah.
like I have this like house in Lebanon where I have like so many of like my like I have dresses from when I was like in Disneyland when I was little, and like games that I used to play, and like the house is just like filled with memories basically.
Mhm.
And my uncles are like, this is all junk, like why don't you get rid of it? And
How
I'm
dare
like,
you,
what do
uncles?
you mean? Like no, like how are you gonna remember like things like this? And it's even like just like having that like 1 second oh, like you see this dress and like, oh, you remember this memory. Just having like those 5 seconds of like remembering is just like makes it so much better, you know? Like what are you
Mm-hmm.
gonna look back on? And it's like that's why I'm the one in the friend groups that takes pictures. Like take pictures and videos, like seriously.
No, but it's a super good way to kind of like, even if it's a step one of like, okay, the idea of just being old and forgetting things and like your health and all these things that are deteriorating and just the overwhelming thought of like, oh my God, one day I'm gonna be old. I think it's such a good advice to like, well, you can start tackling that like right now with something as simple as like document
Mhm.
everything. Like whether like for you it's like videotaping and photos, some people it's journaling, like
Yeah.
just get your thoughts and your memories down on paper so that
Yeah.
when you do get to a point that you're either forgetting things or you just want to show
Mhm.
off what life you had
Yeah.
because you I think growing old too has a sense of regret to it
Yeah.
because how many like I said there's so many movies where old people are like not good
Uh-huh.
anymore. They regret their life and they're like, regret
Mhm.
everything I did. And that's a huge question. Like, so many people ask each other personally, like, oh, do you have any like
Yeah,
regrets?
yeah, yeah.
So you don't want to get to that point and be like, oh my God, I regret everything I did.
Yeah,
So it's a good advice to just start now. And there are things you can do right now to stop making yourself worry
exactly.
so much
Yeah.
about being
And
old.
I feel like also like movie wise like why are all the movies so sad about like growing old? Like I feel like that's like like why do you have so many regrets, you know? Like I feel like
Mm-hmm.
movies should be about like should have that idea that it's a positive thing as well, you know, like growing
Mm-hmm.
old with like I don't know, your loved ones or like things
Yeah.
like that and
Or I don't remember what designer did this recently, and maybe you know, but there was a designer who for was it Milan Fashion Week? I don't know, did a whole collection of all the models were over like their
mhm.
40s
Mhm.
or something like that. So it was all like aged models, which I thought has a really good point to what you're talking about with the movies is the fact that we don't appreciate in society the beauty that comes from growing old
Yeah.
because there's the beauty in like growing old with your loved one, there's like the kind of regal elegance of women getting older and
Mhm.
more refined beauty, but we don't appreciate that. Like that's something we rather be
Yeah.
like, oh, you need to be young, plump, and look like
Yeah.
you're a child for male validation. But
Yeah.
that's not true. There's so many different things about getting older and becoming a lot more beautiful and
Yeah.
seeing life in a more beautiful perspective.
Yeah, because like obviously also you get like more mature and like you think back on like the thing is like what I hope like one of the fears is like I hope that I'm gonna have enough like of these experiences that when I'm gonna be old I'm gonna be like okay like like I was successful at like living, you know,
Mm-hmm.
like I've had a life where I've experienced different things and it's not like oh like I need to do this and that now like that I'm old and I like a lot of people I know they tell you like work when you're young so that you're like successful and rich when you're older and you can like rest but it's like I don't want to do that like I don't want to
Yeah.
do that you
While
know
you're, because the bringing back the point you mentioned earlier is like being young and physically capable and having all this energy. Like you want to do it
mhm
now, even if it costs the money, even if it costs the time.
yeah
It's better to do it now. And then that way, when you're sitting, you don't have those regrets or that sense of like, I didn't do enough.
yeah
And I think for me, that also brings up a really good suggestion of like kind of map out in your life what success means to you when
mhm
you're older. Because I have an idea of like, what like envision yourself as like granny rocking
mhm
chair like Lana and Rima, what are we proud about, what is like when we look back in our life. And I think Melissa Griffin, she has a really good like her first podcast
mhm
episode, that's one of the things that she talks about is like when you look back on your life what would you think was like fun. And I
mhm
pondered over that question for like literally weeks when she
yeah
asked that because I was like, oh my God, what does that mean to me?
yeah
What does that mean to old Lana,
yeah
right? So it's about questioning, and that's something you can do now. You don't have to wait when you're 60 to decide what
mhm
life and success meant to
yeah
you. You can decide now and have it change as you keep
yeah
going so that by the time you're like old, you can sit there and be like, okay, even though I had all these shifting ideas of what was success, what
mhm
was making me feel fulfilled at this stage of my life, at that stage of my life, you don't regret anything. And
yeah
you don't feel or look at yourself in the mirror and go like, what did I do with my life? And now that I'm all wrinkly and old and incapable,
Yeah.
like I want to do all this now.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
not the
yeah.
point.
That's
So,
why like also I have that mindset to always like say yes to things. Like
mm-hmm.
even if like I'm like no, like I'm never gonna like that, but like just say yes so you experience it. You never know like what you're gonna end up finding that like new things that you like in life, and it's just like yeah, like creating all those experiences and experiment. Like honestly, life is all about experimenting. Like just
Mm-hmm.
experiment
Yeah.
and yeah, I mean
And then, like I was saying, you decide at the end, like whether the experiment was successful or not.
exactly. And at the end, even if it wasn't, like it still is because you went through it. Like
Yeah.
it's like not like oh, like I regret like going through that. Like
Yeah.
no, because how did you know that you were gonna regret it before you actually went through it? You know?
Yeah. And it's like a personal choice as well to decide whether or not you regret the things or the choices
Mm-hmm.
that you made. It's not just like up to fate for you to regret it,
Yeah.
for you to do something and then not think about the consequences in the moment or whatever else the situation may be. It's not for you in that moment to then be like, oh my God, I'm going to regret this for
Yeah.
the rest of my life. Yeah, that's something that you can decide
Mm-hmm.
and you can mature over because like the same regrets of like 5-year-old me picking an apple instead of an orange for lunch is
Uh huh.
totally different than like
Yeah.
regrets 19-year-old Lana
Yeah.
now sees as like what is a regret,
Yeah.
what is all that. So you define it at the end of the
Yeah.
day. So you don't need to be as scared of like, oh, what am I going to be able to do about it when I get to that point? Because you can do
Yeah.
something about it now and you can decide about it later too.
Mm-hmm.
You're not in this scenario where you're stuck in the kind of like whatever happens now is like what's dictated for the
Yeah.
future or whatever I think is going to be 70-year-old Rima and
Yeah.
Lana is what's going to be the
Yeah.
future. It's not
I honestly
necessarily
don't
about
think
that.
about it too much. I just think of like it's kind of like nostalgic, like to grow old. But
No, but bouncing off the nostalgic,
uh huh.
like I think that's why you like especially people like us who it's not about oh okay am I gonna have a bad time when I'm older but like I rather feel nostalgic. It's us who needs to give advice for the people who are actually like because this whole video topic idea I was explaining to Rima right before was the fact that it was I actually asked somebody like what are you scared of and they were like getting old. So that's that too, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is like for people who aren't scared of being old, it's the ones who then have the best advice of like what practices we do and you
Yeah.
taking photos and me journaling or me
Mm-hmm.
having this whole like concept of like I define what success is
Yeah.
and na 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 na. That's what then allows for other people who do have that fear to kind of let it like put it into perspective
Yeah.
and people who do feel nostalgic that
Yeah.
way.
Yeah. Also, another point is like growing old is like I feel like you grow, and then one of the fears is like losing like the people around you, because like you're gonna go through your own story and everybody else is gonna have their own story, and it's like you're gonna have those friends that like kind of like are in the past now, like like
Mm-hmm.
now I have, for example, my group of friends from high school, and it's like we were talking back in the Christmas break like oh like we're never going to like stop meeting, and like we're always gonna like have each other, but it's like till when, and like
Mm-hmm.
at some point like there has to be some point where it's like we're all like having our own thing, and it's like even like family wise, like I think of like our parents and stuff,
Yep.
like they're not old, but like just like
They're
growing
all
the process
yeah.
of like growing old, and like us going being in uni now, and like them being alone, and it's like going through life, it's like okay, now like our priority is ourself, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then it's gonna be like okay, like fulfilling our dreams, and like for me like one thing is like I want to give back to my parents and give them like the life they deserve, and for them like to retire and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
But then it's like when I'm gonna get married, my priority is gonna be like me and my husband, and then me and my kids, and then when my kids go away, and it's like me and my husband again, like we're old, like if we like retire, and it's like what are we gonna be able to do, like is life
Mm-hmm.
gonna get like boring, or like what's gonna happen?
Yeah, and especially for people our age, because like you were talking about, there's so many people who do have the mindset of like do it now because you won't get to do it
Mm-hmm.
later. So that aspect, just bringing it back to how we have that then question of like later on, like, are we gonna be bored? Like, if
Yeah.
we're having so much fun now,
Yeah.
what's gonna happen at the time where we like actually physically can't handle it or do it anymore? or what type of hobbies and things.
Yeah.
But people change, too. Like a lot of people go from being really rambunctious, really high energy, to them being more low energy.
Mm-hmm.
And it can easily be like the opposite way too. There's not like it's not just a one-sided story
Mm-hmm.
of being like old makes you incapable of being anything like that. Like you can take some great examples, like I'm sure you can name a few. Like for me, a huge example is like Betty White.
Mm-hmm.
Betty White was like 100, almost. Did she turn 100? I don't know if she ever turned 100, but she's still, even at like her oldest points, were
Mm-hmm.
super like, maybe she didn't have the same physical capability as when she was a film star
Yeah.
and the top of her game, but at the same time she was still like giving all of these like movies and having so much fun and
Mm-hmm.
hosting shit like SNL. Like that's super cool, and you
Yeah.
don't need to give up. Or like the grannies you see on Instagram who are like weightlifters.
Yeah. I see those.
So you can still find that like excitement
Yeah.
somewhere.
That like balance of like what can I do? But yeah.
There's a balance, and I think there's also like a sense of like newfound excitement, because you won't be
Yeah.
excited about the
Cause
same things that you were 19 as when you're
yeah.
like 70. And I think that scares a lot of people too, because I have a friend, and this was really funny,
Uh-huh.
and he was like, we were watching TikTok together. He's like, oh my god, that's literally like my brother, because it was this guy who was like, oh, I hate being an adult, I don't want to grow up.
Uh-huh.
And then his mom gifted him a vacuum, and he was like, wow, this is the most amazing thing in my
Yeah.
life.
I always
You know?
like yeah.
And the truth is like I also get excited about
Yeah, you
those
find these
things.
new excitements. So yeah, like honestly, like who knows when we're gonna be old, what new excitements we're gonna find. Like
Yeah, maybe it's like another new vacuum.
no.
And it won't be the same as like going out and spending really really late nights with friends,
Mm-hmm.
or baking with friends, or just like all of these little tiny things. But I think baking with friends is still could be really exciting
Yeah.
as someone who's much older. But it's going to be like up to
Mm-hmm.
you to decide what hobbies
Yeah.
and stuff you're going to be excited about at the time.
Yeah. That's also one thing that like I feel like when we're like old, we like I'm gonna need that like that person. Like I'm it's very scary to like think of like, oh like you have a husband, okay, for example, and you're like that's your person that you're gonna grow old with, and that's the person you're gonna be doing these things with and finding those new excitements with. And it's
Mm-hmm.
like a fear that like but if one day like something happens and like you lose connection or like
Mm-hmm.
something happens to him or like
Yeah.
and even like not only to that like your family members and like I'm always scared of like my parents like them growing old
Mm-hmm.
and like I always think of like Alzheimer and things like that. I mean, I don't think too much into it. Like it's not that deep, but like like when I watch movies about it, I like think about it,
Yeah, for
and it's
sure.
like pretty scary to think like you want to have your family at the end of the day when you grow old because they're gonna be the people who like stay with you, and yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and it's so funny because at the same time you were thinking about like, oh, husband and spending time
Uh
and
huh.
someone to grow old with. I was literally thinking like the exact same
Uh
thing,
huh.
and we were talking about this really super super soon, right before we started
Uh
filming.
huh.
Was I was talking about like a quote I saw on Instagram where it's like, don't find somebody to grow old with, find somebody to stay
Stay young
young
with.
with.
Uh huh.
So I think that plays a huge part in it too, and that's where the sense of like loss of connection can also play a huge role there, because
Mhm.
like you look for maybe someone who's going to make you feel young forever, but the tension of creating a family, accomplishing
Mhm.
dreams, and
It's just like okay, obviously you're gonna have these times where you think a bit about it, but like don't think too much about it. And
yeah.
one of my problems is like I think like way into the future, and it's like a big problem because like I just like start like being paranoid and like creating these scenarios, and I'm like, Rima, like what are you doing? Like you're 19 years old, like what?
You have 25 years until that
Literally, like,
happens.
but yeah.
I get it, and I think that brings back to like a really good point of both of like kind of bringing back to what I was talking about with the video, and then your sense of like, why am I thinking about things for
Uh huh.
25 years in the future? Growing old doesn't like it's a fear about the future because there's so much uncertainty
Yeah.
about what is going to happen. So the best thing you can possibly do for yourself is just think about the now. And
Yeah.
what's going on now? How can I improve now? How
Mhm.
do I make my life the way I want it to be now? And
Yeah.
define like, because obviously you have your own idea of like what success will be to
Yeah.
you in 10
Mhm.
years and 20 years, and I have the same for me. So like what can I do now to make sure that
To
I feel like I
yeah.
did my best job to
Yeah.
try to get there. And that way, even if you don't accomplish those things, as long as you tried your best, I think that's a really relieving factor, and tried your best in the now. Like, don't try your best tomorrow, or like, I'll deal with it
Yeah.
tomorrow, but like, do what
Yeah,
you can
that's
today. Don't leave it for tomorrow.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's one thing that, like, in a way it's like a lot of pressure, but it's something that that we're all gonna be grateful for at the end. Like, also, like, another thing that I thought of is like, in a lot of movies they show that, like, when you're growing old, like, oh, like, for example, I don't know, you get more like, you get more impatient and like things like that, and like your personality can completely change. And it's like, it's also like kind of scary to think about that, because like, for me, like, I mean, I hope I'm gonna stay the same, like, very
Yeah.
bubbly person. And it's like, imagine like the person that you're living with completely changes, and it's like you can't live with them anymore. Like, what are you gonna do, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
It's it's so overwhelming as like thoughts to have. So
Yeah.
I think overall, like, continuously, the little pieces of advice we've kept like dropping throughout this
Yeah.
podcast episode has been much more helpful. But what would you say is like your biggest advice? Is it the photos thing about, okay, someone tells you I'm scared of getting old, Rima, what can I do? What would you be your answer?
Like, my answer would be like, I know, like, don't think too much into the future, but also it's like, you want to think about when you're old, like, at that point, like, where like your life is like going to end, and like you're gonna think, you like, when I die, it's
Mm-hmm.
very deep, but like, I want to go and think that, okay, I'm satisfied with the life that I've had, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like thinking, what are the different things that I can do now that are going to make me think that way later on?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think that's like kind of like how you guide your life, you know?
Yeah.
um
I think it's a really, really beautiful way to put it, actually, because it's also, you're addressing the fear of getting old, but also the factor that not everybody gets the chance to get
to
old.
get old.
So that way, no matter what ends up happening, if you
Yeah.
try to do things that satisfy you and satisfy your needs, your goals, your strengths, you end up being in a position where you feel like, when the time comes,
Yeah.
or when you know the time is coming, you
Yeah.
don't feel as stressed or nervous.
Yeah.
And I think at our age, it's really something you don't have to be as nervous about.
Yeah.
But the question always remains is whether
Like,
there will be a tomorrow, anyways.
exactly.
So, oh
Yeah.
my god, girl,
So
we're
like,
talking
just
about fucking death in a
about
bunny
time.
hut. Jesus Christ.
I mean,
The point of the
yeah,
podcast.
I did not think like
It's getting so
Yeah,
deep.
yeah.
Oh my god.
um, we're okay, guys. Don't
Laughing
worry.
break. Laughing. Everybody take a giggle break. Shake it out. Okay.
No, literally.
Whoa. I get like the whole aura of the room just like
No,
starts to shift. Like, we're giving really good advice. I think that if anyone does have this fear, like, you definitely like be jotting down notes about like things you can do.
Yeah.
But then you're also sitting here like
yeah.
even us who's not scared of it, just talking about
Like,
it, it's
yeah,
been
yeah,
brutal.
No, but it's good. I've actually never like actually talked about it this much. Like, I just like, I always like mention with my friends, like, oh, isn't growing old like
Scary?
scary? But like, that's all that we say, you know?
Yeah.
But yeah.
But I think that's why it's almost like all of the fears we kind of talk about on this podcast are a lot of things that are internalized. Like, the thing is that you have these own thoughts by yourself, but you're not really talking about it to other people, or you're not just like, I don't know how many people casually look up like on the internet how like I'm scared of getting old, or like, what does ChatGPT respond to, like,
That's
I'm
true,
scared
like,
of getting
there aren't
old.
like many like talks about it. Like, even like, I don't know, like YouTubers and stuff who are like influencers or have podcasts. They don't really. There's not a lot of talk about like growing old. I think it's like, also people are like, don't want to think about it. Like, try to like push it
Tune it out
in a way.
And I think too is like, the only people who are talking about it are people who are already at that stage of life.
Yeah.
We are 19 and we're like, death, old, wrinkles, like, physically incapable.
Yeah.
People our age don't want to talk about these things because we're not at that stage.
We're not at that stage, but like, also it's like, you have to like kind of
acknowledge it's there.
Yeah.
Acknowledge that that's
It's
a part
there.
of the journey.
Exactly.
And as we keep mentioning, it's not about whether or not, like, it shouldn't be about whether or not you're scared of it. It should be recognizing the beauty and appreciating
And like,
life and the
okay, if
gratitude
you're
that
scared
brought it.
about it, like, what can you do about it, you
Mm-hmm.
know?
Yeah.
Because,
I think that needs to be the mentality of every fear you kind of approach, in the
yeah.
sense that you don't want to get regrets. Is like,
Yeah.
okay, I mean, it's different if you're scared of sharks. I don't
No,
know,
yeah.
don't go swimming with sharks. I don't
No, that's
know. That's not my
different.
best
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
advice.
That's
But
like on a broader like scale, you know?
yeah.
But yeah, and also it's like how we were saying that like it's kind of like guides your life. Like I know some people like, okay, like when I gave like the advice, it's like guide your life. Okay, like those big things that you want to experience, like know what they are, and like, but
Mm-hmm.
also like day to day, like kind of have that mentality like, okay, like maybe not, okay, there's not gonna be any tomorrow, but it's like, you know, like you need to like get a grip and like be like, okay, like right now, the lifestyle that I have and what I'm doing, am I proud of myself or
Yeah.
not, you know? And it's like also I feel like a lot of people right now experience like, depends on your personality, but it's like if you're the type of person who like likes to, like is very generous and like a bit too generous and like wants to take care of others in a way, like
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I've been through that
Me
stage
too.
and I'm glad it happened like before.
When it happened,
Yeah,
yeah.
because I feel like now is the time to like put yourself first. And even if you end up like, for example, there was a list that Lena gave me of like different topics and I
Okay.
chose growing old, and like one of the things that was there, so it's like even if you have to do these things, at the end of the day you're like, even if it hurts you a little bit, you're gonna benefit from it. So it's like,
Mm-hmm.
don't be scared to like hurt other, like in a way, like
Yeah.
it's a bit mean, but it's like don't be scared to hurt others, because they're also thinking that way, they're like also putting themselves first, so you have to put yourself first as well at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, that's like
So where you're at in the future, you're not questioning why you put everybody else first and
exactly.
didn't see reaping the rewards. But when you put yourself first, you do see the rewards you reaped, even if it
Yeah.
hurt to cut the friends out, or to cut the negativity out, or to cut like your favorite things to do, or like doom
Mm-hmm.
scrolling, stuff like that. That's super
Yeah,
important to cut out too,
because
so that
I
you're
mean
in the
your
moment.
life is for you, so it's like you're not here to be pleasing other people unless like that brings you joy, like I'm gonna be pleasing you because I love you. But like if
Yeah.
there's like, you know, it's like you have to choose those people that you are going to put effort into.
Yep, I
Yeah.
agree. So that way, when you get to that stage, you don't regret
Yeah.
putting the effort that you did. And
Yeah.
then you also made the sufficient time for yourself
Yeah.
too. So you're not in this
Yeah.
position.
And it's like, do I want to have these people when I grow old with me? Like, you
Totally.
know?
It's a huge question to ask.
Exactly. Like you don't want to be putting effort into people that later on you'd be like tired of.
Mm-hmm.
You want to put effort into people that you know are going to like impact your life and like that are going to stay with you your whole life, even if it's like not
Mm-hmm.
physically but just like in your memories, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah. And I think there comes the point too to put in effort into people you first meet a little bit and try to
Mhm.
get to know them, to have that experience and that memory of meeting them and getting to know them, even if it doesn't last a lifetime long. But you will
Mhm.
know when you know the possibility of having a friend that does become a lifelong
Yeah.
friend. That doesn't come often, but it does come
Yeah.
around. And that then becomes a huge question. Like you were saying, you need to ask, do I see myself growing old with
Yeah.
this person, but also staying young with this
Yeah.
person? Because as we began this conversation talking about, we both have a sense of like childlike spirit
Mhm.
that I don't want to give away. And
Yeah.
I don't think I need to sacrifice that to be
Yeah. You know, one thing is like
old.
when I meet people is like, do I want to show that side of me? Like, because I feel like it's a very like personal thing.
Mhm.
Like I I only want to show my true self and like be vulnerable with the people that I trust are going to like kind of
Mhm.
reciprocate those things with me and
Mhm.
like put effort towards me as well, you know.
Yeah, and that way that when old Rima's looking back at it, she can also see that there was people who put in
Who
the
cared
effort for
about
her.
you, and
Yeah, and
yeah.
you didn't just surround yourself with a lot of mindless nonsense and just
Yeah.
trying to fit in or keep the
Yeah.
friends you could and hold a
Yeah.
grip tight on them, but actually hold on to the people who cared
Yeah.
and gave efforts.
Yeah.
And
And you know, because at the end of the day, like I do believe that like human beings are not meant to be like alone. Like
Yeah,
I always watch like videos about these things, and like I do believe that like we need to like be with people and like share our
I do too.
experiences, and like that's the whole thing of like, oh, like why do you feel lonely and like things like that. Like you need those people around you. So
Yeah,
yeah.
totally. Like there's you can and it does happen to be like that idea of that lonely old person that lives like down the street,
Mhm.
but it's also not in a sense as long as you're curating it in the moment in the now. You
Mhm.
can curate this idea that hey, okay, maybe if you're alone in the future you can look back and see how many people cared and loved for
Yeah.
you because you were picky and choosy about who you wanted to spend
Mhm.
your time with. Because I can definitely, the people who are most lonely in this life, or at least at that stage of life, must be the people who spent their whole lives not
Yeah.
caring for other people
Yeah.
and then being in the situation of being older and having nobody
Yeah,
care for them.
because like it's better to be okay, even if you're old and you're like at a stage where like you don't really have those people around you anymore and you do feel lonely, but in your mind you still know that you weren't, like
Mm-hmm.
it wasn't like that. And that's so much better than like I could not imagine myself being like lonely and then thinking like not having people to think about that,
Yeah,
you know?
I know.
Yeah.
I can imagine it too. And with that, I'm gonna wrap it up. I'm gonna
Okay.
wrap it up because we're already at the 32-minute mark, and I
Okay.
think this was such a like
It was
it was such a good
it was super
conversation.
nice. Like, yeah.
There was so much to pull away from the taking photos to also being in the now to
Mhm.
defining your own success to choosing who you want to be in your
Yeah.
life that way that you don't have all of these sentiments that movies and society has
Mhm.
stigmatized around, what are the threats of becoming
Yeah.
old, what can we be scared about. And if you are someone who's scared about it, you can check out the summary on my Instagram, who will also be shared with Rima, and I'll be
Mhm.
sharing all her links in the description as well if you're interested in getting to know her more and her life. Also, we've been joined the whole time by my dear teddy bear. And with that, bye, bunnies!
Bye.